Hello there, Elizabeth Cote here, and welcome to Entertainment Life. Today we're talking about a movie that's probably one of the funniest movies I've seen in a very long time, Mr. Peabody and Sherman. It's based off of a cartoon short that was done in the 1970s as part of the Rocky and Bullwinkle show. A lot of those shorts tended to become movies. The only one that hasn't yet is Fractured Fairy Tales, but I think that's because it gets a little too complicated. That makes fun of fairy tales. We already have a bunch of fairy tale shows that have twists and things like that. I mean, if you want a twist on a fairy tale, go watch Once Upon a Time. You don't have to see it in a movie form, and there are just so many fairy tales within the Fractured Fairy Tales that they've done that it's really difficult to put those all in a movie. Now, Mr. Peabody and Sherman may have also had the problem of there's so many parts of history and so many times that Mr. Peabody and Sherman have gone back in history. But in the way they set this up, it's very good for this movie. Now, the premise of the original show was that there was this dog. He was a genius. He built a time machine and always had to go back and fix glitches in time, and he did that with his assistant, Sherman, who happened to be a human. They decided to take more of a familial stance in this movie and had Sherman as his adopted son. And for a lot of the movie, what kept popping up was, can a dog actually raise a boy? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. Yes. Because you see throughout the entire movie that no matter what happens, Mr. Peabody is always there for Sherman and is always ready to bail Sherman out and help him out with any issues that happen, even if Sherman causes them. And it's very upset when Sherman is upset. So the movie starts with Sherman. It's his first day of school, and he's trying to impress one of his teachers with the knowledge of history that he knows by disproving that George Washington cut down a cherry tree. And there's this girl in the class who sees herself as kind of the smartest girl in the class, and she doesn't like the fact that she was shown up. And she makes fun of him in the cafeteria, and they start getting into a huge fight, and he ends up biting her. Which, we know, you don't bite kids. I mean, I know they're 6, and in fact, when my family was younger, they were kids we knew who bit, but it's not a good thing to do. We know that. And a social worker has to be brought in, and I didn't really like her. She was one of those characters who was all about, my way is right and your way is wrong, and you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And she was all about trying to get Sherman away from Mr. Peabody just because Mr. Peabody was a dog. No one else seemed to really care about that. In fact, they really didn't care about the fact that he could talk and walk. Nobody ever mentioned that. It was all, you're a dog, you can't raise a kid, so I'm going to take this kid away from you. And Mr. Peabody realizes he has to do something, he has to do it fast, so he tries to, invite Penny's family over and make everything smooth and good. And things start going crazy, though, when Sherman decides he's going to, show Penny that he's not full of crap. So he takes her to the time machine, and they end up going back in time. This is where, the time portion of the show usually comes in, because Mr. Peabody has to bail them out of the situation they have caused in the time-space continuum. And what's great about this movie is you really learn things about time. For example, they go back to ancient Egypt. And I didn't know this. I'm kind of freaked out by this, actually. We find out that when pharaohs died, their wives were buried alive with them. I mean, I knew that pharaohs had servants that went with them and treasured artifacts that went with them. They usually had statues that represented their souls. They were called Ka statues. They didn't mention those. But the fact that wives were killed and buried with them, that's just creepy. I've been obsessed with the ancient Egyptians forever. I have never heard of this. Even when I was in college, I was learning ancient African history. This never came up. And I think if it had come up, I would have been very freaked out. I mean, I know the gods are very violent, and I guess because the gods were kind of manifested by the actual civilization had to be violent too. But that's a little much. And another thing that I really liked was the Renaissance. I loved meeting Leonardo da Vinci. That was hysterical. And not only did we find out how Mona Lisa smiled, but we also saw his flying machine. They implied that he actually made one. There are some theories that he did make one that nobody ever saw. So that was kind of interesting. And another part of history, we got to learn about the Trojan War, found out Agamemnon led it. For some reason, I was always under the assumption that Odysseus led it, but we, learn things every day. All day, every day. That's just, this is all about learning. And that's what I love about this movie, because you learn, but you also have fun. And everyone's going to love it. Parents are going to love it because their kids are actually going to learn something. Kids are going to love it because it's animated and has all these jokes. Some of the jokes don't fall very well, but, those punny things were in the original show and stick to the original show very well, so those were intentionally done, and done in a way that worked. Sometimes it didn't, sometimes it did. So kids will love it because of that, and everybody else is going to love it because it has everything you could possibly want in a movie. I laughed, I cried, I just had a whole bunch of fun. And that's really what people look for when they go to the movie theater, I think. And that's all I can really say about it. So, until next week, bye-bye, everyone.